Today, I want to talk about how founders can stay consistent on LinkedIn. This title may seem outdated to you because you might think, haven't we solved consistency just by using AI? Technically, yes. That is if you're okay with publishing AI slop that you probably didn't even read and that is not authentic. But if you want to build a real following, you actually have to have yourself or the person you're trying to create content for invested and involved. I myself have worked in the past few months with many founders and I discovered this system where it works. In 2025, it's obvious that growing your business, growing your product awareness through LinkedIn thought leadership actually works. It's a great method. And as an example, Alex Hormozi, if you know this influencer, recently broke the Guinness World Record by selling over 2.5 million copies of his book within 24 hours. Basically, he couldn't have done this if he didn't have this preconceived following on LinkedIn and the other channels. So why does this struggle happen for most founders? Obviously, founders are busy, but I see that the main struggle is actually to balance between staying consistent, being systematic in your approach towards content, and actually feeling authentic, not feeling like you're sounding fake, like it sounds like AI. Basically, to preserve that spontaneity, that feeling that you're actually doing something that is real and you believe in. Founders, I find, usually fall for either two typical processes. One, I call it the spontaneous founder. So basically, they have a pitch deck or feature launch that is very successful and they're pumped up with adrenaline, they feel inspired. So they spend an hour writing that manifesto, that post, and it actually, the rawness, the realness, it becomes viral, gets attention, but inspiration fades and the following weeks, they don't post anything. And later, a month later, 2 months later, they start posting again. They need to start building their following all over again from scratch. So they were at level 23 of the game, finding the grandmaster, and then they're back in level 1. The other type of founder is the systematic founder. So basically, most founders think in systems. And so what they do is they reverse engineer Palantir strategy or any other big brand, and they have it all figured out, the formats, the case study. They know exactly which formats, how to do. The entire system is in their head, but when it's time to execute, they actually feel deflated. Content creation seems mechanical, like a chore, and the audience also feels this. And what they end up doing is, okay, we'll skip this week's post. I'll post next week. Next week occurs and the same thing happens. So both of these founders result in basically deprioritization of content. Founder has a lot of other to-dos and just it either doesn't get done or they pass it along to the marketing manager. Marketing manager passes this along to the freelance or to AI. And we end up where the audience gets AI slop that we see everywhere. So what is the alternative to this? Because this is not the way Alex Hormozi built his following. So there's no exact plug and play fix for this. What I do with my founder clients is basically find ways to keep that motivation going, get them to feel enthusiastic about what they want to create. Also, I make sure to maintain 3 rules. One, we talked about they're busy. So I don't want them to invest more than about 2 hours a week on content, sometimes less. They publish content that their audience will actually love, not just they need to feel enthusiasm. Their audience needs to feel like it's valuable and they appreciate it. And 3, it needs to serve the positioning document, the strategy that we set out initially. So when we begin a project, we create the positioning, the plan, so it needs to align with what we want to accomplish. So how do I do that? Basically, these are the 8 personas. And to get the juices flowing with the founder, I sometimes shift between different creative personas to get the founder in the right mindset. And remember, what I'm talking about happens in my session with the founder. So if it's you that want to do the same kind of work, basically it means you allocate a certain amount of time. And what I'm going to cover in this presentation is just what happens in this allocated time. How can you get yourself geared and motivated so you don't fall into that feeling stuck? So just a few preliminaries. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the actual session, But obviously, I'm not going to talk about all the things you need to cover to get to this point. So these include positioning, finding out which sources give you inspiration, what are the formats that you're going to use, competitor analysis. So when you start a project, you need to know the landscape, you need to know how others are making it. AI workflows. So we covered before, like smart ways to use AI to make the job of content creation faster. Human workflows. So some of the things you'll create actually will require other team members like designers, etc. involved. So building those workflows out, making sure there's no bottlenecks, and knowledge management, making sure that everything you publish, actually you know what you're doing, and you have a second brain that helps you manage it all. And we also talked about this, but I'm not going to cover all these topics now. In future session, yes. Okay, so the first persona is the healer. Okay, why is this the first persona? Basically, when we're starting the session, I don't want to give the founder the idea. I don't want to impose my preconceived idea. Sometimes they come with their own notions, their own ideas of what they want to create, something they've been thinking about. So I want to give them that space. So this is the persona of the healer. They listen. An example of someone I think who personifies this kind of founder is Gary Vee. So Gary Vee, if you know him, always has this energy. He's loaded. He's ready to go. Just press play. So for this kind of founder, you just need to let them talk and vent out what they have in mind. They're already enthusiastic. They're already motivated. So how do you notice this? You notice they're high energy. They have ideas. And the guided question you can use is, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? And I think the role as the content expert here is really to help frame the idea. If they are in the stream of consciousness, maybe you find the story that wraps around this. Maybe you relate this to the audience or the positioning that you created. Second persona is the chef. Okay, so what is the chef? The chef basically prepares great dishes in advance. So in this analogy, the founder is the guest of the restaurant. They can pick and choose from the menu. So this persona actually requires some preparation. So the example I'm giving is Ryan Roslansky. So this is the CEO of LinkedIn. And recently he also became Microsoft Office productivity software. So in charge of the entire Microsoft Office suite and Copilot. So a very busy person, okay, one of the busiest. So for this type of founder, and most founders are busy over the top of their head, we might want to make it as easiest as possible for them to create content. Basically, what we're going to do, I mentioned the sources before. So before the meeting, I'm going to go over to the sources that I can rely on. These are the sales calls, the previously content that they published, what competitors are doing, the news, features they released. And I'm going to create a list of kind of topics that I think would work well and then pitch it to them during the meeting. So a good guiding question is, tell me which of these 10 topics actually resonate the most. So we're still tapping into that feeling of resonance, where if one of the topics resonates with them, this is probably something you should go for. Next is the therapist. This is close to the healer, but more interrogating than holding space. Great content often has to do with stories that has some sort of struggle, some sort of conflict. As a therapist, you're exploring these emotional stories. The example I'm giving here is the kind of content that Laura Erdem creates. I don't know if you know her. She's the sales director at a company called Dream Data. And she often shares like personal stories, anecdotes. In the story that you're seeing on screen, basically she shares a story about a sale that she didn't manage to close and blamed it on herself. Then years later, she discovered it wasn't her fault. Like the client told her it was a bad time for them, and she finally nailed the success story. So this, I would say, this persona fits at a time where the founder is going through stuff, having challenges in the business, and this lets them deal with it. They don't see content as like something external that they're doing. They're actually coping with it through telling this story. So this could be a struggle they're currently having or something they overcame. So the motivation comes from sharing their success or their struggle, sharing their vulnerability, but also it gives them some sort of dealing with this, and the telling of the story and trying to branch it into something that you publish actually gives you some clarity on the matter. So a guided question here could be, what's a challenging thing you're currently dealing with, or something tough that you just overcame? Next is a librarian. I call it a librarian because this is the type of founder that when you talk to him or her, it feels like you're talking to a walking library of knowledge, of expertise. These are the people who write books, usually the mentor types. So they probably have a book in their brain that they still haven't published. So the role of the librarian is really pick just one item from this long list of topic, long syllabus, and frame it into this content. So someone who's great fit for this kind of content is Andy Christodina. So I think for over a decade, he's been publishing this sort of elaborate how-tos on various topics of content and AI. And don't think because these founders are knowledgeable that we can't help them to turn these ideas into better content, because we're not looking for kind of documentation style of content. So some interesting angles you can ask is investigating questions like, when have you personally seen this idea in action? So you're taking like this how-to topic and giving it an example, a visual example, something from real life. How could you show this instead of saying it? Or why should we share this now? By the way, if you're the founder, you can use the same kind of things to ping pong yourself and this way overcome your own obstacles, be able to produce this content. So this kind of founder tends to be more theoretical, and they need these questions, this guidance to be more down to earth. A great example is Alex Hormozi that we mentioned earlier. He does a bunch of types of content, but one of them is like sharing a certain framework. He has frameworks for different things about managing a successful business. Next is the journalist. So much like the chef, the journalist has to do with prior work that needs to be done involved. So the journalist covers the news. What I usually have with the founder that I'm working with, if you have an accountability partner for creating content that can also work, is having a shared WhatsApp group where you share potential news, topics you find interesting that you can cover. If you know newsjacking, basically it's a highly successful method because it offers you the chance to hop on relevant topics to your industry and give your own point of view. So, for example, Sora 2 happened. Okay, everyone is talking about it, but as someone who's helping the founder, I would look for angles that would be their specific perspective. How does their positioning connect to this type of news? Someone who is doing this type of content on LinkedIn is Linas Belias, I think. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he's a very popular LinkedIn writer. He covers all things technological, AI, always saying this is a game-changing thing, technology that just was released. So a good question for guidance is, what is everyone talking about? What is something that happened that actually you think people should talk about, and relating to those news? Next is the consultant. So sometimes we have to put on the hat of the business consultant, whether we're the founder creating the content or the content expert. So basically, it's the time when you need to vary your content a little bit and make it a bit more salesy. So sometimes you can't just cover content that's nice and value giving. So my example here is Tommy Walker. He's also a content marketer that I follow. And in this post, he is actually promoting his workshop. So how do you know you need to do this kind of topic? First of all, sporadically, every now and then, you do need to create the more salesy content. Or if there are stresses in the company to show some business results, and it doesn't have to be a sales pitch. So this type of content could be like a video, why customers choose us, or a customer testimonial. What's important is that it's more business oriented. This is some content that I also recently did with a client of mine. It was very successful. He decided to take that piece of content that we did about differentiation of their product and actually use it across the company. So next is the wedding photographer. Sometimes what you're creating for LinkedIn or social, it's not going to be like the huge thought leadership piece where you're going to give your point of view. So sometimes founders go to visit conferences, do things that they need to cover. So in journalism, this type of content is usually called color pieces. Someone who's doing this a lot is Irina Novoselsky. This is the CEO of Hootsuite. And it seems like she spends most of her time in events. I don't know, she has good for her, but it's still a challenge to create this kind of content. And it doesn't have to be fluffy. So as the content expert here, I would try to examine like some guiding questions, like what actually happened in the event? What did the event reveal? Why does it matter? And how do you feel about it? Uncovering a thread that can be said about the entire event, something that will be more than just this happened, then this, then this. So that can help you with that. Finally, there's the planner. And I think this is an up and rising type of content, and we need to have this persona more and more. This is content that AI can't produce, and it's the kind of content that needs time to come to fruition. So let's say you're doing a survey or you're doing some sort of experiment for the next 30 days. So if you're the planner, you need to plan out all the pieces that have to happen for this to come out. Someone who's doing this a lot, this type of content, is Adam Robinson. So you can see in this post, in the last 30 days, I've spent 10K on LinkedIn. What's important about these sort of content pieces is they're really showing real world examples. So they are interesting. And the questions that you need to ask yourself to produce this content is, how will we execute it? What are the milestones where we will actually measure and share it out for this to be a success? Because this type of content does require a lot of involvement. So that's the 8 personas. I summed up them in the table. So you can see that the healer, you use it when the founder already has some ideas and your role is listening. The chef happens when the founder is overwhelmed, and what you do is curate certain ideas for them. The therapist, this is when they're facing a challenge. You can feel they're going over something. So you need to investigate and use your emotional intelligence. The librarian, when the founder has a lot of knowledge in their brain, and your role is to keep knowledge management and help them create the content. The journalist, where they want to be part of the conversation and your task is to spot the items. The consultant, where you want to deliver fast business results and you need to show your sales skills. Photographer, when the founder is out and about and you need to document them. And the planner, where the founder is open for these kind of experiments and you need to manage the project. All right, so that's the presentation for today. See you next time.